The fluorescent lights buzzed too loud. Soren noticed that first. Not the squeak of shoes on linoleum. Not the distant wail of a monitor down the hall. Just the lights, buzzing, flickering slightly above the east corridor. The one he hadn't meant to turn down. He stopped walking. His hand tightened around Cale's small fingers. Something shifted in the air. Pressure. The kind that doesn't come from a storm outside. Comes from people. Specific people. The kind whose presence rewrites the temperature of a room without a single word. Cale tugged his sleeve. Why'd we stop? Soren didn't answer right away. His eyes moved to the far end of the hallway. 3 men. Walking side by side, not rushed, not casual. Deliberate. Each step landing with the kind of weight that told everyone nearby to recalibrate. They wore dark clothing, fitted and expensive. No hospital badges. No visitor stickers. Nobody had stopped them at the front desk. Nobody was going to. The one in the center was the tallest. His eyes moved through the corridor like a security camera. Methodical, recording, missing nothing. When his gaze reached Soren, it didn't pass. It stopped. Soren's jaw tightened. Don't react. Don't draw attention. Too late. The one on the right, broader, jaw set hard, had already clocked the child. Soren stepped slightly in front of Cale. The men kept walking. Closer. The tall one in the center slowed first. His eyes dropped. Just for a fraction of a second to Soren's left wrist. The sleeve had ridden up. The bruise was visible. Dark purple-green. For days old, at least. His expression didn't change. But something behind his eyes did. You're in the wrong hallway, he said. His voice was low. Even. Not threatening, worse than threatening. Certain. Soren met his eyes. Appointments on this floor. Move the appointment. Cale peeked around Soren's hip. The broad one on the right, driven, made a sound low in his chest. Not a growl. Something older. The hallway went completely still. A nurse 3 doors down pretended to look at her clipboard. An orderly turned his cart around and went the other direction. Driven tilted his head slowly. Say that again. Soren's pulse hammered. He kept his face even. Cale, 5 years old, wearing a yellow hoodie, holding a small foam dinosaur, looked up at Velas with the kind of open curiosity that only children have. Unfiltered, unafraid. Velas looked down at him. Something crossed his face. Gone before it fully arrived. But Soren saw it, and that terrified him more than the bruise, more than the corridor, more than the 3 men who made the air feel like a held breath. Hi viewers, if you were Soren right now, cornered in that hospital hallway, would you tell the truth or keep running? Drop your answer in the comments. Because Soren had been running for 5 years. 5 years of motel rooms and new names. Fake appointments in real hospitals. Emergency exit routes memorized before the front door. Every decision made around one purpose. Keep Cale invisible. And in 30 seconds, 3 men had looked at that child and something behind their eyes had shifted. The way it shifts when a person sees their own reflection somewhere they didn't expect it. Velas crouched. Not dramatically. Not with performance. Just down. Eye level with Cale. The way someone does when they want a child to feel seen, not small. Cale stopped fidgeting. Hey, Velas said. Quiet. Almost gentle. Coming from a man who'd just made an entire corridor clear out. What's your name? Cale opened his mouth. Soren's hand gripped his shoulder. The gunshot cracked through the east wall. Glass exploded inward. An alarm shrieked. And the hospital, quiet, fluorescent, ordinary, became something else entirely. Soren pulled Cale down. Velas was already moving. Glass was still falling when Driven hit the wall. He pressed his back flat, one hand already reaching under his jacket. His eyes swept the corridor, entry points, exit lines, blind spots, all of it processed in the time it took the alarm to reach its second pulse. Valus pulled Soren and Kale into a recessed doorway. One move. No hesitation. Stay low, he said. He wasn't looking at Soren when he said it. He was watching the east corridor. Counting. Soren's hand covered Kale's ear. The boy hadn't screamed. He'd gone very still. The way children do when the adults around them stop pretending everything is fine. The third brother, Selim, moved past them without a sound. His eyes tracked the ceiling, the ventilation lines, the gaps between overhead panels. Another crack. Closer. Not a gun. Something structural. Driven exhaled through his nose. They breached the service entrance. How many? Selim said. At least 4. Maybe 6. He glanced at Valus. They weren't following him. A beat. They were already here, Valus said. Soren's stomach dropped, because that was the part he hadn't prepared for. Running assumed pursuit. Running assumed distance between him and the danger. If they were already inside, already positioned, then the math he'd been using for 5 years was wrong. Every safe route he'd mapped. Every exit he'd memorized. Calculated wrong. Valus turned to him. Same eyes. Same measured expression. But now there was something underneath it. Not anger, not yet. Something that had been sleeping a long time and was waking up slowly, the way the worst things always do. The name you said, Valus started. I didn't say anything. You said it in the hallway. Soren pressed his lips together. Kale tugged his sleeve. I'm scared. I know. Soren pulled him closer. I know, baby. It's okay. It wasn't okay. Valus watched that exchange. Watched the way Soren's whole body changed around the child. Not just protective, but bonded. Wound together. The way people are when fear has been shared so long it becomes the same thing as love. He looked at the boy again. The hair. The jaw. The way Kale held himself, even scared, even small, with a stillness that didn't match his age. Driven appeared at Valus's shoulder. He lowered his voice. You seeing what I'm seeing? It wasn't a question. Valus didn't answer. Soren caught the exchange. He shifted his weight slightly, moving Kale behind him again. Don't, Valus said. Don't what? Don't put him behind you like that's going to change anything. He's my child. I'm aware. 3 words. Quiet. But the weight in them was enormous. The kind of weight that comes from something already decided, not something just being considered. Soren's eyes narrowed. You don't know anything about him. I know enough. You know nothing. Then why? Valus said slowly. Did your hands start shaking the moment I looked at him? The alarm continued above them. Somewhere down the far corridor, footsteps, heavy, coordinated, moved in a pattern that wasn't medical staff. Soren said nothing. Selim reappeared. 2 on the east stairwell. 1 covering the elevator bay. We have maybe 4 minutes before they reach this corridor. Driven checked his weapon. I want to know who authorized a hospital breach. Rasken doesn't ask authorization, Selim said flatly. The name dropped into the space between them like something physical. Valus went very still. Soren watched his face. There was a history in that stillness. Old and heavy and unresolved. The kind that doesn't announce itself loudly. It just settles into the bones of a person and waits. Driven's jaw locked. You said Rasken Syndicate. Soren had said it in the hallway, barely above a whisper. But these men had heard it the way dogs hear a frequency no one else can. Yes, Soren said. Why are they after you? They're not. Then why? They're not after me, Soren said. The corridor felt tighter. Driven looked at the boy, then at Valus. Something moved between the brothers, quick, silent. The kind of conversation that only happens between people who've shared enough blood and enough battlefield that words are almost unnecessary. Valus crouched again. Even with the alarm screaming. Even with the sound of boots growing closer. He went down to Kale's level and said quietly, almost gently, "What's your name?" Kale looked up at Soren. Soren shook his head. But Kale, being 5, and honest the way 5-year-olds are, looked back at the tall man with gold-green eyes who smelled like something familiar he couldn't name yet. He opened his mouth. The floor shook. Explosion. East stairwell. And the hospital corridor filled with smoke. The smoke hit before the screaming did. Gray and rolling, pouring under the stairwell door like it had somewhere to be. The alarm changed pitch from alert to evacuation. And the hallway that had been mostly empty became suddenly violently full. Nurses, orderlies, a patient in a rolling chair, still attached to an 4-pole. All of them moving fast toward the west corridor. None of them knowing that the west corridor had 2 men already positioned in it. Velis grabbed Soren's arm. Not rough but absolute. "Move." "Where?" "Away from the crowd." He pulled them sideways, through a door marked staff only, into a narrow service hall that smelled like industrial cleaner and old tile. Selim was already through. Driven was last. He came through backward, pulling the door shut, eyes still on the main corridor. "2 confirmed," he said. "Armed. Not hospital security." "Gear?" Selim asked. "Black tactical. Suppressed weapons. Moving like they've drilled this." "They have," Velis said. The service hall was dim. One overhead light, flickering. Pipes running the length of the ceiling. Soren pressed Kale against the wall and knelt in front of him. "Hey, look at me." He held the boy's face in both hands. "You don't make a sound. You understand me?" Kale's brown eyes were wide. He nodded. "Good. Whatever happens, you stay against this wall. You don't move unless I tell you. What if something happens to you?" Soren's chest cracked down the middle. He kept his expression steady. "Nothing's going to happen to me." Kale looked past him at Velis. Velis met the child's eyes and gave one slow, single nod. Something in Kale's shoulders released. Soren stood and turned, and the look he gave Velis was complicated. Not gratitude. Not quite. Something harder than that and more honest. The door at the far end of the service hall moved. Handle turning. Velis shifted his weight without a sound. Driven moved left. Selim right. The door came open fast. A man in black tactical gear stepped through, weapon raised, and Driven was already inside his reach. One motion, efficient and brutal, and the man went down before he'd taken a full step into the corridor. No shots. No noise beyond the impact. Selim caught the door before it could swing back. Velis scanned the gap. Clear for 20 seconds. Go. They moved. Soren with Kale in his arms now, the boy's face pressed against his shoulder. Through a second door, a storage room, out through a supply corridor that led out near the hospital's radiology wing. Soren knew this floor. He'd memorized it 3 weeks ago, when he first booked the appointment. He'd memorized every floor. But the man he'd used as a contact, the one who'd helped him secure the appointment under a false name, had clearly talked. That was the only explanation. They tracked the appointment. Not him. The appointment. Which meant they'd known he was coming. Which meant they'd had time to position. Which meant this wasn't a reaction. It was a trap. Soren's arms tightened around Kale. A second explosion. Farther away, north side of the building. Shook the lights. "Perimeter breach," Selim said quietly. Driven turned a corner. Stopped. Held up a fist. Everyone froze. Down the adjoining hall movement. 2 figures moving fast and low, checking rooms as they passed. Searching. Soren watched their pattern. They weren't checking rooms the way people look for a general threat. They were looking for something specific. Moving past doors without opening them, then stopping at specific junctions, the intersections, the points where a person carrying a child would have to slow down. They knew the floor plan. They knew exactly where to funnel someone. "They're hurting us," Soren said under his breath. Velis glanced at him. East is blocked. Now they're pushing south. The only open route is back toward the main atrium. Soren's eyes moved to the ceiling, the ventilation grates, the supply route they'd just come from. They want us in the atrium. Open space. Nowhere to put him down. Valus was quiet for a moment. Him, he said. Not Soren. Not them. Him. Soren caught it. Set his jaw. Both of us. One of the searching figures paused at the far junction and turned, and for 1 second, his eyes scanned the corridor directly toward them. Soren pulled Kale tighter. The figure reached for his radio. Valus stepped out of the shadow. The shot was suppressed. Fast. The figure went down. The second one spun, Driven was already moving, and the second figure hit the wall and didn't get up. Silence. 3 seconds. Valus turned back to Soren. No expression shift, like he'd stepped on a bug. Kale lifted his head from Soren's shoulder and looked at the 2 men on the floor. Are they sleeping? He asked. Nobody answered. Soren pressed the boy's face gently back against his shoulder. Valus came close, close enough that his voice was barely sound at all. They're not after you, he said. Soren kept his eyes forward. Look at me, Valus said. He did. They're not after you, Valus repeated. Each word separate, landing deliberately. They're after him. The fluorescent light above them buzzed. And somewhere on the far side of the hospital, a door kicked open. More boots. More men. More of them than before. The secured wing was behind a badge-locked door. Driven handled that in 4 seconds, the badge reader now dangling from the wall by 2 wires, and they were through. The hall beyond was quieter. Older. A section of the hospital that didn't see much daytime traffic. Long-term recovery. Private rooms. A nurse's station that had 1 person on duty who looked up once, saw Valus, and immediately found something else to focus on. They moved to a room at the end of the hall. Selim checked it, cleared it, held the door. Soren set Kale down on the padded chair in the corner. The boy still hadn't cried. He sat with his foam dinosaur pressed against his chest, watching the room with big quiet eyes. Driven stood at the door. Selim took the window. Valus stood in the center of the room and looked at Soren. The silence between them had texture now. Wait. Soren crossed his arms. He knew what was coming. He'd known it was coming since the hallway. Since the moment Valus looked at Kale and something shifted. You can't outrun a question forever. Eventually the room gets small enough that the question fills it completely. Start talking, Driven said from the door. Driven. Valus's voice was even. Driven went quiet. Valus kept his eyes on Soren. You're not being accused of anything. That's a creative way to describe the last 20 minutes. Those men weren't sent by us. I know that. Then you know we're not the threat in this room. Soren was quiet for a moment. He glanced at Kale. The boy was watching him. Not scared, just waiting. The way children wait on the people they trust to tell them what the world means. How long? Valus said. How long have they been after him? Soren's throat moved. Since before he was born, he said. The room absorbed that. Valus didn't react. But something behind his eyes moved. Slow and deep, like something beneath still water. Driven pushed off the doorframe. What does that mean? It means, Soren exhaled. It means when I found out I was carrying him, someone already knew. Before I did. Before the test results came back. Someone in the system that was surrounding me, surrounding us both, had already been notified. Selim turned from the window. Who notified them? I don't know the name. I never found the name. Soren's jaw was tight. What I know is that by month 3, I had people watching my apartment. Not protecting me. Watching. And the difference between those 2 things. He stopped. A memory hit him. Not a full one. A fragment. The smell of smoke. A door kicked in at 2 in the morning. running barefoot across tile. He pushed it down. I ran, he said simply. I took what I had and I ran. And I've been running since. Where's his father? Driven said. Soren didn't answer. Not because he didn't have one. Because the answer was a grenade. He'd been holding it for 5 years. Carrying the pin in his pocket every single day. Every quiet motel morning. Every school enrollment under a false name. Every birthday cake with the wrong name written on it because the right name was too dangerous to say out loud. Velis stepped closer. Not aggressive. Deliberate. Soren. Hearing his name. His real name. Not any of the 6 aliases. From this man's mouth made his chest do something he didn't have words for. You already have a guess, Soren said. I want to hear you say it. Why? Because there's a difference between guessing and knowing, Velis said. And right now we need to know. Not for us, for him. He didn't point at Kale. He didn't have to. Because whatever comes through that door next is going to come for the boy. And if we're going to stop it. I know, Soren said sharply. He pressed his fingers to his eyes for one moment. Just one. Then dropped his hand. They've been looking for him since he was born, Soren said. Because of what he is. Because of what his blood means to the territory map. If you control the air. He stopped. They don't want him because they love him. They want him because he's a key. Living. Breathing. And anyone who holds him holds the claim to 3 contested territories that Rasken has been trying to lock down for 6 years. Selim said nothing. Driven's expression had gone flat and cold. The kind of cold that comes right before something irreversible. Velis hadn't moved. He's not just any heir, he said. No. He's a targeted one. Yes. Velis looked at Kale. The boy looked back. Dinosaur still pressed to his chest. Who's his father? Driven said again. Quieter this time, which somehow made it heavier. Soren opened his mouth. Closed it. Opened it again. One of. The window shattered. Not a bullet, a repelling hook. Steel. Caught the sill and pulled tight. Selim moved before the glass stopped falling. And through the radio clipped to the downed man they dragged into the room earlier. A voice crackled through, distant and staticky. Bring me the child. We already know the floor. Soren grabbed Kale off the chair. Velis turned to him. Finish the sentence, he said. Soren met his eyes. One of you, he said. The radio crackled again. Driven picked it up off the floor. Turned the volume down. But not off, because sometimes what an enemy says when they think no one's listening tells you everything. The voice on the other end wasn't hurrying. That was the part that should have been reassuring and wasn't. Whoever this was, they'd sent men into a hospital. Breached 2 floors. Taken casualties without adjusting pace. And were now apparently comfortable enough to narrate. We have eyes on exits 1 through 4. Service corridor sealed. You can wait us out if you want. A pause. Or you can send the boy to the lobby and we'll consider this an even exchange. Nobody in the room moved. Exchange for what? Selim said quietly. Not into the radio. To himself. Turning it over. Velis was looking at Soren. Soren was looking at the floor. The weight of what he'd just said, one of you was still in the room. It hadn't gone anywhere. It was sitting in the corner with Kale and the foam dinosaur, waiting for someone to deal with it. But that conversation would have to survive this one first. Driven moved to the window, careful, keeping his body behind the wall. He looked out at an angle what he could see without exposing himself. 2 on the south roof. 3 vehicles at the north entrance. 1 more at the ambulance bay, that one's positioned to cut off the lot. He pulled back. They're not here to negotiate. They never were, Soren said. Selim's phone buzzed. He looked at it, jaw tightening, and turned the screen toward Velis. A live feed. Hospital exterior. 3 black SUVs had pulled up in the last 60 seconds. Clean, tinted, no plates. And stepping out of the middle vehicle, moving slowly, deliberately, the way men move when they have no reason to rush, a security detail. Earpieces. Jackets cut to hide what they were carrying. And then the man they surrounded. Older. White-haired. Built like someone who had once been physically enormous and had simply compressed rather than diminished with age. He didn't look up at the hospital. He didn't scan exits or check his surroundings. He knew where everything was already. Soren's sharp intake of breath was small. Almost nothing. But in a quiet room, almost nothing is everything. Velis looked at him. You know him. Soren's hand had gone to Kale's head, pressing the boy's face against his side, turning him gently away from the window, away from the phone screen. Yes, Soren said. From before. Long before. Soren's voice had changed. The steadiness was still there. The same steadiness that had been there through the hallway and the smoke and the running, but underneath it now something was pulling. Old and cold and very specific. The radio crackled. Not the man from earlier. A new voice. Low. Measured. The kind that doesn't raise itself for anyone. I'll make this simple, the voice said. You have something that belongs to this family. Has for a long time. You've been allowed to run because it served certain purposes. That window is closed. Soren stared at the radio. Return the child to his rightful bloodline, the voice continued. And whatever arrangement you've been maintaining, whatever story you've been telling yourself about why any of this was ever your choice, we can call it square. Driven looked at Velis. Velis hadn't moved. Rightful bloodline, Driven repeated under his breath. Something in his tone had gone very careful. The kind of careful that sits right on the edge of something else. Selim said quietly, They believe they have a claim. They believe they own him, Soren said. Low. Precise. Not angry, something past anger. The kind of feeling that exists on the other side of it, where everything is very clear and very cold. That's what this has always been. Not protection. Not family. Ownership. Kale is not a person to them. He's a territory deed. Kale made a small sound against his side. Soren dropped a hand to his back. One slow, steady circle. The radio voice again. I gave you 5 years, it said. Generous by anyone's measure. The words landed like something thrown from a height. 5 years. Not guessing. Not estimating. Knowing. Soren's face had gone completely still. Velis stepped closer. He's been counting. He's been waiting, Soren corrected. There's a difference. Counting means you're marking time. Waiting means you have a plan for what comes after. He looked up at Velis. He had a reason to let us run. Something he needed to align first. Something that took 5 years to position. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Then Driven said, What aligns in 5 years? Selim's eyes moved to Kale. Then he said very carefully, A child old enough to travel. To be presented. To be documented without raising questions about age and condition. The fluorescent light above them gave one long flicker. Outside, the hospital's main PA system cut on, smooth, automated, the kind of voice that gets used for drills and evacuations. Attention, all visitors. This facility is now in emergency lockdown. Please remain in your current location. Do not attempt to use stairwells or exits. Repeat, Selim said. They pulled the lockdown. Driven turned from the window. They control the system, which meant they had someone inside. Not just the tactical units outside, someone with facility access. Admin clearance. The kind of access you don't buy in an afternoon. The kind you arrange in advance. Velis turned from Soren to his brothers. Something passed between the three of them. Fast, silent, the shorthand of men who've made decisions together under pressure for years. Then Velis turned back. This isn't just about the child, he said. Soren waited. This is about what holding the child gives them. Territory. Legacy claim. Proof of lineage to dispute what we control. Yes. Which means whoever that man is outside, whatever he is to the syndicate, this has been political for a long time. Since before Kale was born, Soren said. I didn't understand that at first. I thought it was personal. It took me almost 2 years to understand that I was never the target. I was the vessel. And Kale, his voice dropped. Kale was the strategy. The radio crackled one more time. The voice calm, still with the patience of someone who has never once worried about being wrong. Said, "You took what belongs to us 5 years ago." A pause. "Time to come home." Soren looked at Valus. His eyes were dark, resolute, and underneath that, something that had been locked away for 5 years was pressing against the surface, asking to be let out. Not fear, recognition. Because he knew that voice. He knew it the way you know a fire that burned you. Not from seeing it, from surviving it. And the man standing outside this hospital, the one surrounded by a security detail and 5 years of patience, had been in that fire, had started it. What do you think Soren should do? Trust the Triplet Alpha Kings, or find another way to protect Kale alone? Drop your answer below. Would you trust them? The fire started on a Tuesday. That's the detail Soren always came back to. Not the smoke. Not the sound of the door splintering. Not the feeling of running barefoot across a parking lot in February with nothing but a phone, a go bag, and a secret that could get them both killed. Tuesday. Because Tuesday was ordinary. Tuesday was groceries and laundry and almost normal. And that's exactly when it happened, the moment he'd let his guard down far enough to believe, for about 48 hours, that they were safe. He was wrong. He'd been 23, 7 months along, living in a third-floor apartment in a city he won't name, one he'd chosen carefully, methodically, for its lack of connection to anyone who might recognize his face. The apartment below him belonged to a man named Delaney Hurst. Delaney was quiet, kept odd hours, never asked questions. That was the detail that should have been a warning. People who never ask questions already have answers. Soren found out later. Months later, in a motel in Ohio, reading through documents he'd stolen off a syndicate courier, that Delaney Hurst had been placed there 8 months before Soren arrived. Waiting. Patient the way only well-paid people are patient. When the fire started, Soren had been asleep. It was the smoke that woke him, not the alarm which had been cut, but the smell. That specific smell that gets into the back of your throat and sits there like a warning you almost didn't believe. He was out of bed before he was fully conscious. The stairwell was already compromised. He went out a window onto the fire escape, 3rd floor, February, no shoes, and came down into an alley that should have been empty. It wasn't. 3 men, positioned, waiting, the way Delaney Hurst had been waiting, the way all of them had been waiting, apparently, for the exact moment he'd feel trapped enough to use the most obvious exit. Soren didn't stop moving. He'd learned that in the first year. The moment you stop, the moment you try to process what's happening instead of just surviving it, that's when they close the gap. He ran. Down the alley. Into a side street. Through a gas station lot. Across 4 lanes of traffic that almost solved the problem for the syndicate without their help. He made it 2 blocks before his legs started shaking. He stopped in a doorway, pressed his back against brick. One hand on his stomach. Not checking, not afraid of that specifically. Just grounding himself. Feeling the movement. Reminding himself what he was running for. That was the night he understood it completely. This wasn't surveillance. This wasn't a warning. This was an extraction attempt. They didn't want him. They'd been willing to burn him out, drive him into an alley, take what they wanted and leave everything else. Which meant they knew what Kale was before Kale was born. Someone had talked. Not Soren. He hadn't told anyone. Which meant the leak was on the other side. Someone in the world he'd briefly, catastrophically, been connected to. Someone who knew the bloodline, knew the timeline, knew the approximate due date, had passed that information to the Rasken syndicate before Soren ever had a chance to disappear. He spent the next 6 weeks finding out who. It took him to 4 cities and 2 states. It took him a favor from a woman named Celestine Ark, a name he hadn't said out loud in years. Celestine. She moved money for people who needed it moved quietly. She'd helped Soren once before in a different life under different circumstances. When he called her, standing in a payphone outside a bus station, she didn't ask why. She just said, "How much do you need and how fast?" She was the one who helped him get out. The one who gave him the documents, the name change, the routing that put him 3 layers away from anyone trying to reconstruct his trail. And the one who, 3 months after he'd settled Kale into his first real crib, in a small house in a small town, sent him a single message. 6 words. No explanation. "Don't contact me again. They know." He'd tried to reach her. The number was disconnected. He tried the backup line. Nothing. He tried the 3rd channel, a message drop system they'd agreed on, and got no response for 11 days. On day 12, a different message arrived in the drop. Not from Celestine. Someone else. Someone who knew the drop existed, which meant they'd either broken her or... Soren didn't finish that thought for a long time. He didn't let himself. Because if Celestine was gone, if they'd reached her, then she'd paid for helping him. And he'd have to carry that. He was still carrying it. Standing in this hospital room, with Velas's eyes on him and Kale pressed against his side and the voice of the man who'd started that fire crackling through a stolen radio. Soren was still carrying all of it. Every mile. Every name. Every Tuesday. "She helped me get out," he said quietly. Not to anyone specific. Just out loud. Because some truths need air before they can be dealt with. Selim looked at him. "Who?" "A woman named Celestine Ark." Soren's voice was steady. Deliberately steady. "She was the reason we made it far enough to disappear. She built the exit." Velas went still. Driven turned from the door. Selim said, very carefully, "Celestine Ark." "Yes." Selim looked at Velas. Something moved between them, not the usual fast silent exchange. This was slower. Heavier. "We know that name," Velas said. Soren looked up. "How?" Velas's jaw shifted. "Because," he said, "Celestine Ark was declared dead 14 months ago." The room went completely still. "She was found," Selim added quietly, "in the aftermath of a syndicate operation outside of Memphis. A warehouse fire." Soren heard the words. He heard them clearly. He just needed a moment before he could do anything with them. "She was supposed to be dead," Driven said. "Not cold, something more complicated than cold." "That was the report." "Supposed to be," Velas repeated. He was looking at Soren. "That person you said helped you escape," he said. Soren met his eyes. "Was supposed to be dead," Velas finished, and left the sentence right there. Open, unresolved, a door swinging on its hinges with darkness on the other side. Kale had fallen asleep. Somehow, impossibly, wedged into the padded chair in the corner with his foam dinosaur tucked under his chin. He'd gone completely still, the way children do when their bodies override everything the world is asking of them and just shut down. Soren watched him for a moment, then turned back to the room. "You want us to come with you," he said. It wasn't a question. Velas stood near the window. Not at it, but near it. The radio was on the table, silent now. Selim was by the door. Driven was pacing, not anxiously, but with the contained energy of a man who had somewhere specific he wanted to go and was being asked to wait. "You can't stay here," Velas said. "The hospital is compromised. Whatever route you had planned." "I know it's gone," Soren said. "Then you already know what this is." Soren crossed his arms. He knew. He'd been running the math since the moment Velas had pulled them out of that corridor. The math was simple and it was brutal. He had no safe house left. The contact who'd booked this appointment had clearly been flipped or pressured. Whatever network he'd been operating inside, thin as it was, built from borrowed favors and Celestine's ghost infrastructure, it was burned. He had a 5-year-old child. And the Rasken Syndicate had just demonstrated they were willing to set a hospital into lockdown to retrieve him. That's a message about resources, about reach, about the fact that wherever Soren ran next, the margin was going to be smaller than it had ever been. Running wasn't a strategy anymore. It was just a direction. "I've watched you with him," Soren said. Not accusing, just precise. "All three of you. Since the hallway." Valus waited. "You're not neutral about this," Soren said. "You're not offering to protect us out of policy or protocol, or because it's the right thing to do." He paused. "You have a reason." "Yes," Valus said. "Just that." No qualification. No explanation layered around it to make it easier to hear. Soren respected that. He didn't like it, but he respected it. "If we come with you," he said. "What does that look like?" Driven stopped pacing. Selim turned slightly from the door. "It looks like safety," Valus said. "That's not specific enough." "I know." Valus took a breath. The first visible breath Soren had seen from him since this started. Like something had shifted slightly. "It looks like a secured compound. Staff that's been with our family for years. Medical care that doesn't require fake names or appointment systems someone can flip." He paused. "It looks like Kale not having to sleep in places where you've memorized the exits." Soren's jaw tightened. Because that was a specific detail. The kind of specific detail that only lands if someone understands what the life actually looks like. Not the danger from the outside, the texture of the inside. The constant, exhausting arithmetic of survival. "And me," Soren said. "You come. On what terms?" Valus looked at him steadily. "On the terms that you're his. That wherever he is, you are. That's not negotiable from our side." "Nothing about your involvement is negotiable for me either," Soren said. "He gets to know you exist. He doesn't get handed to you. I decide what his days look like. What he learns. What he hears about the world he's being brought into." His voice hadn't risen. Each word landed flat and precise. "I decide what he becomes." Driven made a sound that might have been the start of an objection. Valus cut him off with one glance, then looked back at Soren. "Yes," he said. Soren waited. That was it. Just yes. No conditions attached to the yes. No version of the yes that had smaller print underneath it. Just yes. Soren looked at Kale. Still asleep. Dinosaur tucked under his chin. Completely unaware of what was being decided around him. What had already been decided, in a way, by blood and biology and 5 years of running that had led, inevitably, it seemed, to this exact room. Soren had always known this moment was coming. Not like this. Not in a hospital with broken glass on 3 floors and a voice on a radio that he recognized from a fire. But the moment, some version of the moment where running stopped being enough. He'd known. He just kept running anyway. "Because that's what you..." Selim said carefully. "We can look. That's not enough." "Soren." "She paid for helping me," Soren said. "If she paid and she's still out there, then part of what we're doing from this point forward includes finding out." Valus looked at him for a long moment. Then, agreed. Driven exhaled through his nose. He wasn't happy. He wasn't pretending to be happy. But he was done arguing. Soren could tell the difference between a man who disagreed and a man who was through saying it out loud. Selim said quietly, "We need to move in the next 12 minutes. The lockdown sweep is going to reach this wing." Valus looked at Soren. Soren turned to Kale. He crouched beside the chair. Put one hand on the boy's knee. Kale's eyes opened. Slow, heavy, the way children wake when they've been pulled out of something deep. "Hey," Soren said softly. "We're going somewhere new." Kale blinked. Looked at Valus. then, without a word, climbed out of the chair and walked to stand beside him, not between Soren and the door, not toward the exit, beside Velas, like it was already decided, like something in him had been waiting, in the way that children sometimes wait. Not with anxiety, but with the patient certainty of someone who already knows how a story ends. Soren stood. He looked at his son, then at Velas. He said, "Fine, but I decide what he becomes." And the 12 minutes started counting down. They moved at night. 3 vehicles. No convoy pattern, staggered departure, different exits. A route that looked like 3 separate trips until it didn't. Kale was in the second vehicle with Soren, asleep again before they hit the first highway on-ramp. The boy slept like someone who had, on some deep biological level, decided that these specific people meant safety. His head was against Soren's arm, his hand still loosely holding the foam dinosaur. Soren didn't sleep. He watched the dark highway and he thought about Celestine. 14 months. He'd spent 14 months not knowing. That was the part no one talked about when they discussed survival, the weight of the people you'd left in the wake of it. Not enemies, not threats. Just people who'd extended a hand at the right moment and paid the price of proximity. He made himself stop thinking about it. The compound was 3 hours out. He'd been given a brief, not a tour, not a presentation, just the essential map. 2 main structures. A perimeter that was staffed, not just walled. A medical facility on site. A schoolroom. A schoolroom. He'd almost said something when Selim mentioned it. Instead, he'd looked at Kale and thought, he's never been in a real classroom. He'd been homeschooled, which was a generous word for what it actually was. Careful, consistent, loving education conducted in rented spaces and borrowed time, always with one eye on the door. A real classroom. Something that didn't need to be packed up in 20 minutes. He was still sitting with that thought. Uncomfortable, something between relief and grief, when the convoy slowed, then stopped. Not at a light. Not a planned stop. Velas's voice came through the vehicle's comm unit. Hold. The driver's hands stayed on the wheel. Soren's shoulders came forward. Ahead, 2 vehicles, positioned diagonally across the road. Not police. No lights. Just 2 dark SUVs angled to block both lanes, and beyond them, shadows that were standing still in the way that trained people stand still. Waiting. How did they know the route? Selim said. More to himself than anyone, the way someone talks when the math isn't adding up. A beat. Then Driven's voice. Flat. They didn't. Another beat. Someone told them. Soren went very cold. The convoy had been arranged by a small team, for people at the Virex compound who'd been contacted in the last 2 hours to arrange the extraction. For people who had, according to Velas, been with their family for years. One of them had moved faster. Not with the family. The comm crackled. Velas again. Jackson, take secondary route now. Selim, stay on primary. The driver. Jackson pulled a clean, immediate left. No hesitation. No asking. 3 seconds later, Soren heard it behind them. Engines. Fast. They're splitting, Jackson said. I see them. Velas said through the comm. His voice was the same as it had been in the hospital corridor. Same pitch. Same temperature. The voice of a man who processes danger as information rather than emotion. Soren put his hand on Kale. The boy stirred but didn't wake. Soren kept his hand there. The Virex brothers were running a tactical split, pulling the pursuing vehicles in 2 directions to divide the response. Standard. Clean. The problem was that splitting also meant Soren and Kale were in the vehicle that wasn't traveling with Velas, which meant Velas had made a call. He'd put the safest driver on the most important vehicle. Soren would have made the same call. He didn't have to like it. The secondary route ran through industrial corridors. Service roads, loading dock access, the kind of infrastructure that exists around cities without ever being on any tourist map. Jackson moved through it the way someone who'd practiced this exact drive moved. Without hesitation, taking turns at points that weren't labeled, using lights only when required. Soren tracked the comm traffic. Selim had engaged the pursuit on the primary route, controlled, measured, drawing them further from the secondary path. Driven had looped back to intercept from behind. Then, a sound on the comm. Not an explosion. Close to one. And then Velas's voice. "We're clear. Status, Jackson." 30 seconds out, Jackson said. Soren exhaled. Kale was still asleep. The boy had slept through all of it. The sudden lane change, the hard turns, the comm traffic, the controlled chaos of people he barely knew making life or death decisions in real time around him. Soren looked at his son's face, untroubled. Like the world was still something simple. That's what he'd been protecting. Not just the body, not just the bloodline. That specific, precious, irreplaceable thing. The ability of one child to sleep through the storm. The vehicle slowed. Compound gates ahead. Already opening. Jackson pulled through. The gate closed behind them. On the comm, Selim said something in a low voice to Velas. Too quiet for Soren to catch clearly. But he caught the last 3 words. Confirmed. It's Torian. Soren didn't know that name. He looked at Jackson. The driver's face had gone flat. Who's Torian? Soren said. Jackson was quiet for a moment. Then, someone who shouldn't have been in a position to know our route. That wasn't an answer. It was a redirect. Which meant the real answer was something that happened inside this compound, between people who trusted each other, in a network that was supposed to be closed. And somewhere between the gate closing and the car door opening. Somewhere in that small span of seconds, the vehicle carrying Velas came through the second gate. Soren got out, and in the dark, across the compound yard, he heard the last thing that arrived through the comm before it went quiet. Driven's voice. Low. Certain. The explosion was at the east access point. Soren. Static. Then nothing. Soren spun. Jackson was already moving. Where's Kale? Soren said. And the fear in his voice was specific and immediate because Kale had been asleep. Had been in his arms, had been. He looked into the back seat. Empty. The door on the far side was open. He didn't remember it opening. He didn't remember anything moving. Just empty. And the foam dinosaur. On the seat. Left behind. He ran. No plan. No route. Just ran. Toward the east access point. Toward the smoke already rising against the dark sky. Toward the last direction he'd registered before the world went wrong. Jackson was beside him in 2 steps. Matching pace. The east wing is. I know, Soren said. He didn't slow down. The compound was large. Structured. Designed with the kind of intentional geometry that made it easy to defend and, if you knew it well enough, easy to move through without being seen. Whoever had taken Kale knew it well enough. Torian. The name had already been confirmed. Someone inside. Someone positioned. Someone who had watched the convoy route get assembled and sent the information before the vehicles left. And then, while the pursuit on the highway was drawing attention east and west, slipped back through the compound's own access point with a sleeping child in a yellow hoodie. Soren cleared the corner of the second structure. He could see the east wing now. A door hanging open. Lights inside still running. And in the access corridor beyond it, 2 figures moving, one large, one small. Soren didn't make a sound. He ran faster. Velas came from the other direction. Soren registered him without slowing, same trajectory, slightly different angle, converging on the same point the way 2 lines inevitably meet. Selim was already past the door. Inside, moving low along the corridor wall. The large figure ahead, Torian, turned. He had Kale against his chest. One arm around the boy. Kale was awake now. Eyes open, face set in an expression that was deeply, heartbreakingly calm. He wasn't fighting. He wasn't screaming. He was waiting, because he knew Soren was coming. And Soren had never once, in 5 years, not come. Torian, late 30s, compact build, with the kind of eyes that have made a decision and aren't revisiting it. Took 3 more steps toward a secondary access panel. Selim said, "Don't." 1 word. Torian stopped. Not because of the command. Because Velis was suddenly standing at the panel, between Torian and the only exit that hadn't been sealed. Soren reached them a breath later. He stepped directly in front of Torian. Torian's jaw was set. His eyes moved between the men around him with the calculation of someone working a math problem they already know is unsolvable, but working it anyway because stopping means admitting it's over. "Give me the child," Soren said. "Step back," Torian said. "Give me my son." Kale's eyes found Soren's face. Something in them. 5 years old, middle of the night, in a compound he'd been in for 20 minutes. Said everything without a word. "I know. I see you. It's okay." Soren's hands were shaking. He didn't look away from his son. Torian's grip didn't loosen. "This doesn't end here," he said. "You understand that. Whatever happens in this room, Rasken has the documentation, the lineage filing, the territorial claim with 3 co-signatories." He paused. "You can't unfile what's already filed." "Give me my son," Soren said again. Driven moved. Fast. The way Driven did everything without announcement. And Torian's arm came off Kale in a single controlled motion that suggested the alternative had been made very clear. Kale dropped to the floor. Didn't fall, landed on his feet, like someone who'd been held above ground before and knew how to touch down. He walked straight to Soren. Soren went to his knees and pulled him in. He didn't say anything. He just held on. Kale's arms came around his neck and held back. Behind him, Torian was handled. Efficient, no theatrics, and the corridor was cleared. Selim crouched nearby and said quietly, "He's okay. Look at him. He's okay." Soren already knew that. He was checking anyway, running his hands over Kale's back, his arms, his hair. The way parents check, not for specific injury, but for presence. For the reassurance that the whole person is still here, still intact, still themselves. Kale leaned back and looked at him. "You came fast," Kale said. "I always come fast," Soren said. "I know." Kale nodded seriously, like this was a confirmed fact about the world. "The big man who was holding me was scared." Soren blinked. "How do you know that?" His hands were shaking. Kale paused. "Like yours are." Soren looked down at his own hands. The boy was right. He pulled Kale back in and didn't let go for a while. When he finally stood, Velis was beside him. Not saying anything, just there. Present in the quiet way he'd been present through all of this. Steady. Not performing steadiness, just actually steady, in the bone-deep way that comes from having survived enough things that one more crisis doesn't change your baseline. Soren looked at him. He didn't have words yet. Velis didn't seem to need them. They walked back through the corridor together, Soren with Kale against his side, Velis 2 steps to the right, Driven and Selim flanking without being asked, and the east wing door closed behind them. Inside, the compound was quiet. Torian was in custody. The pursuit vehicles from the highway were accounted for. The lockdown on the hospital had been remotely terminated. Selim had handled it with the same efficient detachment he brought to everything. The immediate storm was over. But storms have an aftermath. And the voice from the radio, the old alpha, the one with the white hair and the patience of a man who has never once not gotten what he wanted, had said something before the comm went out. Soren had replayed it twice. Just once in the gap between Jackson's words and the static. The voice, calm, cold, with the specific certainty of someone who has been building toward this moment for years, had said, "You're too late." A pause. "The air has already been claimed." And then the secondary transmission, the one that came through on a frequency nobody in this compound had known was being monitored, had played a recording. Short, clear, official sounding. The sound of papers. the sound of a seal being pressed, and a voice reading from a document. Not the old Alpha's voice, someone else, a legal voice, a notarial voice, reading out a lineage filing. Names, dates, territory coordinates. And at the end of it, the heir-kale is hereby registered under Raskin family claim, effective upon the date of physical custody transfer. Physical custody transfer. As if the filing made the taking legal. As if paperwork could make a child belong to people he'd never chosen. Velas had listened to it without expression. Then he'd looked at Soren. That filing is not binding, he said. Soren said nothing. A lineage claim without the child's presence. Without voluntary transfer of documentation from the birth parent, is a political document, not a legal one. They have 3 co-signatories, Soren said. We have 4, Selim said. Soren looked at him. Our family, Selim said simply, has been contesting Raskin territorial claims for 11 years. We know exactly what a real filing looks like. And we know exactly what that one is. What is it? Soren said. Driven answered. Pressure, he said. That's all it is. They're not trying to win legally. They're trying to make you believe it's already over. So you give up. Soren looked at his son. Kale was standing beside Velas, again naturally without being directed, looking at a framed photograph on the compound wall with the focused curiosity of a child examining something they find genuinely interesting. What's this? Kale said. Velas walked over, crouched, looked at the photograph with him. That's our grandfather, Velas said. He built this place. Kale studied it seriously. He looks like you. People say that. He looks like me too, Kale said. Nobody in the room said anything. The photograph hung on the wall. The old man in it, broad-shouldered, composed, with gold-green eyes that were unmistakably specific, looked back at them. Soren pressed his fingers to his mouth, and the Raskin leader's voice came back to him one last time. From the radio, from the hospital corridor. From 5 years of everything that had led to this room, this compound, this photograph. You're too late. The heir has already been claimed. The leader was wrong. He just didn't know it yet. The filing was filed on a Thursday. By Friday afternoon, it was contested. Not by lawyers, or not only by lawyers. By a coordinated release of documentation that had been building, apparently, for years before Soren ever walked into that hospital. The Virex brothers had been quiet for 11 years. Not inactive. Quiet. There's a difference. And the difference is that quiet people compile evidence while loud ones make threats. Quiet people build cases while loud ones build walls. Quiet people wait for the right moment. And when the moment arrives, they don't announce it. They just move. The Raskin Syndicate's territorial claim network, the one that used lineage filings and documentation fraud and co-signatories who were paid or pressured into agreement, had 17 active threads across 6 states. By Sunday, 9 of them had been handed to investigative journalists, not through back channels, through front ones, named sources, documented evidence, time-stamped financial records showing the flow of money from syndicate-connected entities to territorial administrators who had signed filings they legally could not have signed. The old Alpha, whose name turned out to be Xandros Wraith, had spent 5 years building a trap. He hadn't planned for the trap to be already surrounded. The syndicate didn't collapse immediately. That's not how these things work. They contracted, went quiet, pulled resources inward. The co-signatories who could distance themselves did. The ones who couldn't, who were too deeply documented, started making calls to lawyers of their own. The Kale filing was officially invalidated by a territorial review board 11 days after the hospital. The challenge had been submitted by Selim with 4 signatures. 3 from the Virex brothers. 1 from Soren. The review board had taken about 40 minutes to find the filing procedurally defective on 6 separate grounds. Xandros Wraith had bet on speed and shock value. He hadn't bet on the possibility that the people he'd been hunting had been building a counter for longer than he'd been planning his move. He'd miscalculated. That matters. Because when you miscalculate that badly on that scale with that much documented exposure, you don't just lose the filing. You lose the infrastructure it was attached to. 3 weeks after the hospital, 2 syndicate regional coordinators were arrested on unrelated charges that turned out to be very related. 6 weeks after, a 4th. Xandros Wraith. Patient, powerful, certain for decades that his reach extended far enough to absorb any consequence. Hired 3 separate legal teams and went silent. Going silent was an admission, not a legal one, but Soren knew what it meant. He'd watched powerful men go silent before. It meant they were recalculating, reassessing the cost of the fight versus the probability of winning it. Running the math that they'd assumed would never need running. It was over. Not the way wars usually end. Not with a final confrontation. Not with someone standing over someone else. Not with a declaration or a ceremony or a moment that could be photographed. It ended the way real things end. Quietly. In paperwork. In the slow drain of resources and credibility and the willingness of people to keep backing something that was losing. The compound had adjusted. That was the word Soren used internally because it was the most accurate one. Not perfect. Not suddenly simple. Adjusted. Kale had a room. His own room. Not a motel room with a chain on the door. Not a corner of someone else's borrowed space. A room with a window that looked out onto a courtyard with actual trees, and a desk where he kept 3 foam dinosaurs now instead of 1 because Dreven had, without ceremony or explanation, produced 2 additional ones from somewhere and set them on the desk without comment. Kale had asked no questions about this. He'd simply arranged all 3 in a row and moved on. The schoolroom was real. Soren sat in on the first 2 weeks. Not interfering, just present. Watching his son hold a pencil properly for the first time without someone needing to worry about whether the noise of a fire alarm would require them to pack everything in 4 minutes. Kale was sharp. Soren had always known that. But watching it happen in a stable environment, watching curiosity get to take its time, was something different from knowing it in the abstract. The relationship between Kale and Velis developed the way honest things develop. Slowly. Without pressure. Kale asked questions and Velis answered them. Sometimes with more information than strictly necessary, which was how Soren came to understand that Velis had never actually been comfortable withholding things from someone who deserved to know them. Kale knew, at 5 years old, as much truth as a 5-year-old can hold. That there were people who'd wanted to take him somewhere he hadn't chosen. That the big men who lived here had decided that wasn't going to happen. That the person who'd been protecting him his whole life was still the person who decided what his days looked like. That was enough for now. The rest would come in layers, the way all real things do. Soren and Velis had a conversation. Not the confrontation either of them had been bracing for, but something quieter and more complicated. About 3 weeks in the courtyard after Kale was asleep. The kind of conversation that happens when the emergency is over and 2 people finally have enough room to say what neither of them could say while they were running. It was honest. It was uncomfortable in places. It ended with more questions than it answered, which meant it was an actual conversation and not just a negotiation. Soren walked away from it unsettled. Not badly. The way you feel when something real has happened and you need time to figure out what it means. On the 31st day after the hospital, 2 things happened. The first, Selim confirmed that Celestine Ark was alive. She was in a facility in northern Georgia. Private, secured, recovering from injuries sustained 14 months ago. She had not been killed. She had been taken and held and, apparently, had been working quietly from inside that situation for the entire 14 months in ways that were only now becoming visible. Soren read the report twice. Then he set it down. Then he picked it up and read it a 3rd time. She was alive. He'd carry that differently now. Not without weight, it still had weight, but differently. The second thing that happened on day 31. Velis came to find him. Not urgently, not with news, just found him in the small library off the main corridor, sitting with a book he hadn't been reading, and asked a question. For words. What now? He said. Soren looked up. He thought about 5 years of motels, fake names, fire escapes in February, the specific feeling of a child's hand in his when the air pressure changed and something was wrong before anything had happened yet. He thought about a foam dinosaur on an empty seat. He thought about Kale asking Velis what the photograph on the wall was. He thought about Celestine, alive, working, not giving up even when she'd been given every reason to. He set the unread book down on the side table. Now, Soren said. He looked at Velis. We build something that doesn't need fear to survive. The word landed between them, not explosively, like something that had finally been put down after being carried a very long way. Velis looked at him, and for the first time, in a hospital corridor, through a war, through smoke and radio voices and paperwork filed in bad faith, for the first time, something in his expression moved past strategy, past calculation, past the controlled, measured, gold-green-eyed certainty of a man who had never once in his life not known exactly what he was doing. He looked, just for a moment, like someone who hadn't expected this, who had expected everything except this, and found it somehow to be the thing that mattered most. Outside, in the courtyard, through the library window, Kale was running, just running, no reason, no destination, just a 5-year-old in a yellow hoodie, running across grass in the morning light, arms out, for the simple and complete reason that he could. That's the end of their story for now. But something tells me it's only the beginning. If the story moved you, if you felt every choice Soren made, every mile he ran, every moment Kale looked up and trusted, then hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. Because the next story on this channel carries the same weight, the same stakes, and the same kind of ending you didn't see coming. Don't miss it. And before you go, drop a comment. Tell me, was Soren right to finally trust them? Or would you have kept running? Your answer might inspire someone else who's watching this and carrying something heavy. Share